Hi, everybody. So today I invited Heidi Carino just from reading her posts on LinkedIn. That's the truth, right? So we've never spoke before. Again, this is our very first time. And I thought, okay, 2 minutes, let's start recording and see how it goes. Because I like the element of surprise. So this is first, I'll do my best in trying to just pronounce your name. So this is Heidi Carino, right? But she will talk about her name a little bit more because it's probably a Japanese name, but I don't even know. And this is where I'm going to start how Japanese came into your life because you're obviously British, I suppose.
Yeah. I'm British. Yeah.
Okay, so here we go. So, how did Japanese come into your life?
Okay. This is a story that I've told a few times,
Mm-hmm.
so I'm sorry if you've already heard
I
it.
haven't, so.
Yeah. Okay. So I was working at a casino in my hometown, Newcastle, in the northeast of England. I was working at a casino at night, and during the day, I was going to school with the aim of going to university. And then I met a guy in a club, and we started dating, and he was Japanese. He was
Wow.
studying at the university. And then when his studies finished, he had to return to Japan, and he asked me if I wanted to go. So I was working a job to save money to pay to go to university, and it didn't really bother me if that job was in the UK or it was in Japan.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd heard, I mean, this was back in the late 90s,
Mm-hmm.
before the internet. So I'd
Right.
heard by word of mouth that if you were an English speaker, and I was an English literature major,
Mm-hmm.
then you would be able to get a job teaching English. So I went to Japan thinking I could get a job teaching English, save up money to go to university, come back to the UK and get my degree. Unfortunately, when I got there, I found out that you actually need a degree to work for the English language schools. And I didn't have one. So the choice was either go back to the UK and continue doing what I was doing, or stay in Japan and go to university in Japan. And I was fortunate enough to be accepted to International Christian University, which is ICU for short, in Tokyo.
Mm-hmm.
And they have a really good Japanese language program wherein you join in the September if you're an overseas student, and you spend a year learning Japanese, and then you go on to study your major subjects for
Mm-hmm.
the next 3 years, and the subjects are taught in either English or Japanese.
Wow.
If you're a Japanese student, you enter in the April and you spend a year or however long is necessary brushing up your English, and then you also go on to study your major subjects. So after the first year, English native speakers and Japanese native speakers are mixed within classes, and you might take a class which is taught by an English speaking professor, but all the work needs to be done in Japanese. I once
Wow.
took a course on Western art,
Mm-hmm.
which was taught by a Japanese professor in English, but my assignments had to be done in Japanese. So it was a very interesting experience, and I didn't really have any knowledge of Japanese to that point. It was literally just I met a guy and I followed him home, and that was it. Yeah, that was how
So it
my
was not
relationship.
like you were interested in the culture and then you got interested in the guy because you already had some references. It was nothing like that, right? Because this is what I was expecting. I was like, oh, yeah, probably. That's why I didn't investigate too much and I didn't hear anything about it. I'm like, let's see what happened. But I thought in my mind, okay, she was already into manga or
Yeah, I
something like
mean,
that.
yeah, it was, and to be honest, and think back at that time, there probably wasn't that much interest in Japanese culture anyway. I mean, it was the late 90s.
Mm,
So if you were into Japanese culture, you would have to probably be in London where there was access to that kind of like manga and or anime or whatever,
mhm.
or be in Japan or have quite a deep connection there. You wouldn't just come across it in a bookshop like you do nowadays, right? There's manga in like an average city's bookshop, so you can kind of get into that culture. But for me, it was completely random. I just happened to fall in love with a guy who was from Japan. So
yeah, I
very, I
remember
think
at
very different.
university.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember at
Mhm.
university, I also had my first Japanese friend in the late 90s when I was at university, because there was a moment where we needed, so I studied linguistics and we needed to come up with a sentence in a language that other people didn't know about, right? So I had this friend, Pedro, who was actually studying Japanese. And he
Mhm.
went to Japan for a year, and then he brought his girlfriend over, Lena, and she was lovely. So I would help her with her work, and it was a great window into different
Mhm.
people and different things. And then she taught me a sentence. Let's see if I can say it. I think, okay, this was 25 years ago.
Mhm.
Watashi wa sensei ga suki. Is this possible?
Oh, yeah,
Does this
yeah. It
mean
means
something?
I like my teacher, or I
Right.
like the teacher.
It's
Yeah.
still here. So I had to go to the board and just write it down and then explain what the particles were and blah, blah, blah. So that was a lot of fun. So that was my first encounter with Japanese, and pretty much the only encounter with Japanese I've ever had, even if I love the aesthetics and all of that. So I don't know anything about it, which is great, because
Mhm.
you're going to talk to us a little bit about, some features of the language, I think.
Sure.
So then
Mhm.
you were there, and you didn't come back to England immediately. You just stay there
Yeah,
after
that's
your
right.
studies.
Yeah, I think the original plan was to first earn some money. That didn't work out. So then the second plan was get my degree and then come back to the UK after that. But when I first went there, my husband and I, we were dating, but we ended up getting married within quite a short time of getting to Japan. And he had a job, and while I was at university, I started temping for a company and began my own work. And it just made more sense for us to stay in Japan until it didn't make sense, really. So we just decided to continue living in Japan after I graduated.
So you started immediately. Let me look at this. You started immediately doing things that had to do with language work somehow.
Yeah, well, I had to pay, obviously, for my university fees. My husband was a new graduate. I was a student, and we did have some support from family, and I was able to get a scholarship from the university. But still, there was a lot of money that we had to pay. So, in addition to my husband's full-time job, I was working several part-time jobs. One of them was teaching English. Teaching English is quite a common role in
Yeah.
Japan. This was not teaching English at an academic institute. This was teaching English at a English conversation school. So it's slightly different to teaching English in a university or in a school. And I also started doing transcription. So this was my into translation, which is what I do now. I was asked by a colleague of my husband's to transcribe lyrics from a CD. I think it was a CD probably at the time. Now we have lots of websites which have lyrics on them. But back then you didn't really have any lyrics on the website because people weren't really putting them up there.
Yeah.
And possibly due to the karaoke culture in Japan, whenever you buy a CD, it always has the lyrics in. Whereas if you buy a CD in the UK or the US, the artist doesn't necessarily want to put the lyrics in there because I believe they like to think of the lyrics and the music as one whole entity. So you shouldn't really be reading the lyrics. You should be listening to the music and taking your own interpretation from them. So for albums like that, when they're released in Japan, they add an insert which has the English lyrics, a translation of the English lyrics, and a little what we call a liner notes, which is like a blurb about the album. So I started working with a writer, a Japanese writer, who writes these liner notes and was also doing some lyric translation. And he asked me to transcribe lyrics for songs which didn't have the official lyrics, which is the majority of songs. And I started doing that in my final year of university. And when I graduated, I asked him if I could do this on a full-time basis, moving more into translation. So my first job as a language worker was translating from English into Japanese. So I would
Wow.
transcribe the lyrics,
Mhm.
and then I would provide a interpretive translation in
Mhm.
Japanese. And then my partner, so the person I was working with, my
Mhm.
business partner, he would then take my Japanese lyrics, and then he would finish it off and make it into a complete product. And this is different to writing lyrics to be sung. So
Oh
writing lyrics
yeah,
to be
for
sung
sure.
is a completely different process, which you would
Mhm.
do with the actual artist.
Yeah.
This was more to give people who were buying the music in Japan an
Mhm.
understanding of the lyrics, but it still required quite a lot of clever writing because it had to, you know,
Yes.
read like a lyric. So yeah,
Wow. So
that
you,
was how
when
it
you
started.
say from English into Japanese, you mean mainstream artists, you know, American artists, British artists, like who, for example?
Yeah, so just because the person I worked with, he's a writer who specializes in the 60s and 70s music. So I did a lot of stuff from the 60s, what we call the British invasion. So people like the Hollies. Honestly, you probably haven't heard of most of the people I've worked with. I guess
Well,
I did do some Beatles stuff. I have done some
okay.
Dylan, Rolling Stones,
I have heard of
Queen.
those.
Yeah, I've done interviews with some people as well. So yeah, but the stuff that I was doing was not, say, like new albums, like new
Mm.
artists. It was
Mhm.
more re-releases of
Mm.
albums that people were putting out as collectors things. So
Right.
it sounds impressive, but it's not like
It is impressive.
yeah, I'm not mingling with the stars or
No,
anything
no.
like
I
that.
wasn't
But yeah.
expecting you to like, hey, so what's the story? What did you mean here? Or anything like that. But it's still very exciting, I think. I mean, it is for me. I mean, I
Yeah,
worked with
yeah.
artists. I know how close, I mean, from multiple perspectives. So yes, and worked with lyrics and things like that. So very impressive. So then what an amazing first job. I mean, that is insane.
Yeah, I loved it. And it was great because the guy that I worked with, I'm still friends with him. We're like
Mhm.
best friends. He has a very difficult personality, and I have quite a difficult personality.
That's why you work well together.
Yeah, so I think he said, I mean, I don't think we could work as well with other people, but we worked really, really well together. It was a great partnership. And we probably would have continued if CDs were still a thing. But yeah, people don't really buy CDs as much as they used to.
Yeah.
The music industry itself, as all creative industries, is struggling because there's so much available for free. So it was becoming difficult for me to continue doing that work, which I loved, and also make a living. So in 2016, I then kind of I supported that work on the side, but then I took a full-time job in-house after that. Yeah.
So was that for the Disney resort?
That's right. Yeah.
I was like, what?
Yeah. So
I love
I
it.
went, I started, so I was employed. It's the situation in Japan is a little different to the situation in the US. So Tokyo Disney Resort is where I worked, but I was not employed by Disney. I was employed by Oriental Land, and I was employed as a translator and a copywriter.
Fancy.
It was a lot of fun.
I bet.
I was not that keen on Disney, to be honest, before I went there. And I can say that because I told my colleagues at Disney there, I didn't really understand the appeal of Tokyo Disneyland or Tokyo Disney Sea. It just looked like a lot of people buying a lot of stuff and lining up for rides, which were not that exciting. But once I was in there, I realized how much goes into creating an experience. And it's not about going on the ride. It's about the story that leads up to that. It's about immersing yourself in this different world. It's about it's not about fast, exciting thrills. It's about becoming part of something else. And that really resonated with me. And it's something that the longer I was there, I really began to appreciate it. And I was really fortunate to work with lots of incredibly talented writers and also, you know, artists as well who were drawing for Disney in Japan. So it was an experience that kind of changed the way I thought about what I do as a translator and as a copywriter. So it was very valuable. Yeah.
So you say copywriting, obviously, I guess everybody knows what that means. But what about the translation part of it? Was it technical materials? Was it technical things about the rides? Was it a mixture of all sorts of possible things I cannot think of? What did you translate?
So translation for Oriental Land was done as part of a multilingual team. And the majority of content that we dealt with would be guest-facing content. So the website, get maps that you would use to get around the park, press releases, instructions, guidelines, security measures, anything like that, which needed to be multilingual content. That would be translation. Copywriting would be things which were more transcreation, so more creative. You would have a Japanese brief, and then you would present an English idea based on that Japanese brief, and then that would be used in designs for products or for events and things like that. So it was a job which required quite technical translation skills, but also the more creative, out of the box thinking that translators, also have when it came to copywriting. So you needed to understand Japanese culture and the way that Japanese people communicate quite well to be able to translate that into an English copy, I think. So that was really fun for me because, I went to university in Japan, so I had the advantage of living in Japanese culture for a long time and kind of growing up in Japanese culture, but also being a native speaker of English. So it was quite easy for me to communicate with my Japanese colleagues and translate what they wanted to say in a way that, they were happy with, I think. Anyway, you'd have to ask them. They seemed happy.
So the materials that you translated were actually aimed at foreign people in general, I guess, who were visiting Japan and who would specifically visit Disney.
Yes, that's right. So the all of the translations that the foreign language team works on at Oriental Land, they're all for guest-facing content. So any guest, any person who is visiting Tokyo Disney Resort who is not a Japanese speaker would be using those materials. I believe they used to have more languages, but now they have English, Chinese, simplified Chinese, and Korean. They used to have Thai and Indonesian as well, but I don't think those contents are being updated now. So the language team is quite big in-house at Oriental Land.
Wow. And that lasted for a long period, or?
So I started there in 2016 and I left in 2020, which everybody knows is the pandemic year.
Yes, it's true. Yes, everybody knows.
Yeah. So, but I'd actually already handed in my notice to leave there before the pandemic kicked off. So it was completely unrelated, and it was more to do with things that were happening in my family life. I just decided that even though I loved working at Disney, and it was so, I worked with an amazing woman who basically created the English at Tokyo Disney Resort and taught me an immense amount, and working with her has been huge for my career. But I'd realized that in-house just wasn't for me. It was really hard for me to kind of work within hours rather than within quantity or quality. So to have to turn up 9 to 5, there was flexi time, but it wasn't that flexible. So having to turn up 9 to 5 days a week, every single week, holidays, with it being Japan, you only get, I think I had 12 paid holidays, which is standard in Japan. That's not like unusual, but I had 2 kids and I didn't have any sick days. So it meant it was very, very difficult for me to kind of take time off for myself. And my family was in the UK. And I was used as a freelancer to taking 6 weeks off. Well, not 6 weeks off, but going to the UK for 6 weeks and working as a freelancer. Yeah, exactly. But I couldn't really do that. I couldn't do that with my in-house job. So I'd already decided to leave there, and there were some other things going on at home that I wanted to kind of just take time to sort out. So in 2020, I took a career break, and I think I probably took about 6 months off to just step back and think about what I wanted to do and where I wanted to go. Yeah.
Wow. That sounds amazing, because I can only imagine, because you were there for a long time. So it must have been like coming back to another world. Of course, you were in touch, obviously, with your family and culture and everything else. But wow. So when did you become the president of the Japanese Association of Translators? I'm reading because I might say it wrong, because it's around this time. Am I right?
No,
Was it
that's
long
really
before then?
recent. Yeah,
Ah,
yeah,
it was recent.
I just became the president of JAT
Oh.
in June, but I've been volunteering for JAT for, well, so in 2020 I took some time off, and I decided to focus on my family a lot more. I mean, that was during lockdown, so everybody was pretty much stuck at home focusing on their family, whether they liked it or not.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
I was
but it gave,
pregnant, so
yeah. Oh, were
I was
you? Oh,
focusing
well.
on my family too.
Oh, yeah, focusing on
Yeah,
your pregnancy.
I
Yeah.
was 3 months
So,
pregnant when the lockdown occurred, so I
oh,
was
so was it a lockdown baby? Or no, I
yeah,
guess you
absolutely.
gave
Yeah,
birth.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Ah,
He's from August, so yeah, definitely.
yeah.
Yeah, all the constraints that have to do with that, and all the testing, and all the not seeing
Yeah.
anybody, and yeah, that was that.
Yeah. I mean, at the time it felt so, it felt very different to how it feels now looking back. But
Mm,
that time gave my husband and I a space to kind of reflect on our life and think about what we wanted to do going forward. Like if we were happy to both be working full-time jobs, if we wanted to still live in Japan, if we wanted to still we were living near Tokyo, or if we wanted to move out to the countryside. And the conclusion was that my husband was ready to semi-retire, and I was happy to keep working. But I just left a full-time job, and I hadn't really kept up my freelance contacts. And I really only had that job that I was doing with the lyrics, which wasn't really working out, which was why I went in-house in the first place.
right.
So I was kind of stuck, and I didn't really have anything to do. So I started to look at LinkedIn, and I noticed that copywriters had this amazing community on LinkedIn where they were supporting everybody. They were giving information. That was around the time that, I don't know if you know it, but the Marketing Meetup is a big community in the UK. And I think at the time it was all in person, but they were going online. And I thought, oh, it would be so nice if I had a community like this with translators who spoke in my language, where I could, go and talk to them and just get advice and help them. And at that time, I was a member of the Japan Association of Translators, JAT, but I wasn't really taking part in any of their activities. So I decided to set up my own group. So I set up my own Facebook group, which is called the JE Translator Hub. And I said, I just want a place where I can hang out, get some, just talk about translation issues, see how everybody else is doing. And then from that group slowly grew. I think we have about 100, 150 members now. And then in that group, I asked people about the Japan Association of Translators. And I said, what's the point in this association? It doesn't seem to be doing very much for its members. During COVID, there was no events going on because JAT is essentially an in-person association in the past, and they hadn't really put on anything online, so they were not prepared to deal with this. And it's run by volunteers, so we all have jobs. During COVID, we were all struggling, so naturally there wasn't really that many resources. And people said to me, JAT is really good for this, it's really good for that. So I thought, okay, so instead of complaining about how JAT is not helping us, why don't I go and see if they need any help? So then I joined JAT as a volunteer, and I started doing helping them with their PR, their social media activities. The president at the time, Takeshi Miyahara, he was amazing. I think if it hadn't been for him, I don't think JAT would have seen it through COVID, to be honest. He put in so much effort, so much time and so much energy to do as much as we could, which from the outside looked like not very much, especially with everybody else. But from the inside, looking at how few people there were to get things done, it was really amazing. And that kind of inspired me to become a director this term. And fortunately, people thought I was suitable to be the director, so to be the president. So even though I'm completely brand new to the board of directors at JAT, I've been in the background for the past 2-3 years, kind of helping the board and supporting the board in activities across JAT. And I wanted to be president because I've been looking at JAT and I've been looking at the translation landscape and talking to translators in my group. And I myself went from somebody who was not very successful, doing very, very, very bad in 2020, to somebody now who is supporting my family or my income as a translator. And I did upskill and I did, get information, but I always think it's a lot to do with my attitude, the way I feel about myself, the way I feel about my skills, the way I present myself, the way I'm active on social media. So I do think it's something that anybody can do if they're willing to put the time into it.
I don't know, because your profile is very specific.
Well, yes, I think yes, that's true. Yeah, that's true.
I'm not sure that it's very normal, let's use this word for the lack of a better one, that you have such an intense immersion, right, with the culture and such deep knowledge, because you ended up studying there, like your regular studies, which is not something I guess I've heard of before, because people already, usually the ones that I know, even for Chinese and other more extravagant languages, let's say that, or more, further away from our linguistic reality, it's like they mostly started studying in their master's levels, something like that, right? And only then they were there, and they were there for a year, and then they left, and then they were again teaching English or Portuguese or whatever they spoke, and that was really the story. But it doesn't seem well, it's not your case, definitely, because you were there even before your graduate students studies, so it's very particular. So I don't think that it's just, if I can do it, anybody can do it, because it was such a particular situation, right? You were in such predicament that it's not very common, I think.
Yeah, that's true. But the reason I say that anybody can do it is because when I left my in-house job in 2020, and then I took 6 months off to focus, and then after that I started to retrain in conversion copywriting and marketing, and just to get a little bit more experience. But while I was doing that, I started applying to translation agencies just to get some job as a freelance translator. And as you said, I mean, I do think I have a fairly unique profile and experience, but I was unable to get a rate higher than the entry level rate. So
I read that post that you that you did some months ago about that, for sure.
Exactly.
I sure did.
Yeah. So being able to turn that around, obviously I have the experience and I have the CV there, so it's not like I'm starting from zero. So my experience is different, but I was still in the same position as a lot of translators are, and I was able to leave that position and be in the position I am now. And that's why I'm really kind of passionate, I guess, about being involved in volunteering for translators, because yes, there are a lot of variables. I mean, you need excellent language skills, you need to know the culture, you need to be a really good translator, you need a professional attitude, you need to be good at marketing, you need to have a network, you need all of these things. But even if you have all of these things, if you don't have this confident attitude, if you're not willing to put yourself out there or go and make these connections or be really active on LinkedIn, then you're not going to be able to find the clients that you know, can give you a living wage, basically.
Because in your case, you went through the route of looking for translation agencies and all of that, and things didn't work out the way that you expected them to, or you didn't know how they were gonna play out. And then, so what was the story? You ended up not working with any agencies and only working with direct clients, or?
Yeah. So when was that? So 2020. So I started learning about copywriting, and actually I was planning to leave translation and go into copywriting.
Full stop.
Because I just couldn't. I kept applying to translation agencies and negotiating, but nobody was able to pay me a rate which was even half of what I was earning at Oriental Land. So I wasn't being greedy. I was just looking for a living wage, basically. But that wasn't able to do that. So I thought perhaps the industry was no longer sustainable. And then I was on LinkedIn and I was seeing how copywriters were having a lot of success promoting their service and getting clients through social media on LinkedIn. So I worked for a couple of translation agencies just to kind of tide me over. And while I was doing that, I was studying conversion copywriting, and I was also lurking on LinkedIn to see what everybody was doing and to see how they were getting work. And I researched how copywriters were selling their services. And as I was doing that, I learned about transcreation. And I'm not going to talk about transcreation here because everybody has their own definition of transcreation. But the advantage to transcreation for me is that I was already doing transcreation, and I would say the majority of translators are, especially if they're in marketing translation. But clients, especially in Japan, when you say translation, they have a certain expectation for what you're going to provide them with, and that is usually a direct translation, which is priced per character or per word. But when you talk about copywriting or transcreation, that's a different service. That's a different service which has a different result, which is priced differently. So I knew that if I were able to explain what transcreation or Japanese-based English copywriting was, I would be able to give my clients the service that they wanted and be able to charge the rate that I thought was appropriate. So then I started to come together with my brand, which is Kotonaha Bloom, think about what my brand meant, think about what it represented. I asked a Japanese copywriter to write the copy for my website. And then I still remember, but in 2021, in September 2021, I started posting on LinkedIn with the sole purpose of getting noticed and getting direct clients. And I was working with a few translation agencies then. Only one of them I was happy with, and I'm still working with them now. And I've since moved away, and I work with 4 direct clients, 1 translation agency, and then the odd direct client, like every month or so, who's not a regular client, but you know, is introduced to me by there. So yeah, I've moved away from, and it's not that I have anything against translation agencies. It's just that as I start to price my services differently, I haven't been able to find a translation agency in Japan that is able to pay me equivalent to what I quote, and also has a good understanding of what it is that I can do and can sell that to the client, with the exception of the one translation agency that I continue to work with.
So there's let's say translation there, but there's a lot of, you know, knowledge and creativity and a background that most people don't have, right? Obviously. So it's pretty fascinating. So then you just mentioned your company only in 2000, I mean, only because it's recent, but only in 2021, you actually created your brand, your company, all of this was established, right? So
yeah,
why did you feel the need?
It's just a brand.
So why did you feel the need of creating a brand and not just having your name, which sounds lovely, by the way, Heidi Carino? It just sounds lovely to me. But why didn't you keep it that way, and why did you feel the need to create a brand? This is really interesting to me, because you're such a, I guess, a marketing or creativity oriented person, and I guess probably comes a little bit from there, right? Also the name, the Bloom word, it sounds amazing. It has an effect in your mouth, right? It kind of resonates your whole body, and also takes you to probably Japanese blooming flowers, right? Those white
Right,
what
right,
are
yeah.
they? What are super typical
The cherry blossoms, right? The
cherry
sakura.
blossoms?
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah. So anybody who has given their translation, their freelance, it's not a company, but their freelance persona a brand name, will know that it takes the longest time to decide whether you're going to use your personal name or you're going to use a brand name. My reason was that I spoke to a lot of my Japanese colleagues, and I asked them which sounded more authentic, which would you trust more, a company which was named after my personal name, or a company that had an actual name. And 100% a brand that had an actual name. I think in the UK, it's very common to work with freelancers, in Europe as well, in the US. It's very common to work with freelancers, and therefore having your personal name makes the most sense. As you said, my name is quite unusual. I don't think there are any other Heidi Carinos on LinkedIn. So it's a good name to use.
Yep.
But in Japan, Heidi Carino would not be a name that would necessarily be trustworthy unless I already had a persona there, unless I was already, publicly known.
Right.
So I spoke with I had a lot of back and forth about the naming of my brand. And in the end, I decided that my target is Japanese clients. So it has to be a brand name that appeals to Japanese clients, even if that means that brand name is not necessarily understood by people who don't speak Japanese. So Kotonaha Bloom is a very nice brand in Japanese, I've been assured. But to an English speaker, it probably doesn't mean anything. It doesn't, it's quite unclear what it is that I do. But that's okay, because I'm not targeting, I don't target agencies in the UK or Europe or the US, because
that's very interesting to me. That
well,
you don't do that and you don't think that way, because I would think a little bit that way, right? Like you would, since it's your target language, that you would also look for clients in this particular place, so that they would order their Japanese text to be translated into English, because blah blah blah. But it's very interesting to me, that perspective, and it's something to really think about, I think, from a lot of people.
I think this is just my opinion, but
of course,
I work with Japanese clients a lot, and I lived in Japan for a very long time. And Japanese clients like working with Japanese brands. They like working with Japanese people who understand them, and they want you to be able to communicate well in Japanese. That is a very baseline expectation. So if you are not based in Japan, or you are not a very good Japanese speaker, then you need to offer something else to compete against that. And therefore, for companies who are based in Europe or in the UK or in the US, if they want to win a Japanese client, then they're going to have to work much, much harder than a Japanese translation agency. Japanese translation agencies already offer quite a reasonably priced service for translation. So if you're a company based, for example, in the UK, you would have to be very competitive, which translates as cheap. I think you would have to be really cheap. And that means that you wouldn't be able to pay that much to your translators. Obviously, if you're based in the UK, there are other advantages that you have. So if you're a really good Japanese speaker, or you are a Japanese person-owned company based in the UK, and you can go to Japan and you can sell your service, and you can say, yes, we're based in the UK, we're not a Japanese company, but we have this advantage, we can localize your content, we know the market, then you can probably, negotiate a really good deal. I mean, that's my selling point. So I know that, but I think it's very, very hard for a company based so far away from Japan to be able to win a high-paying client in Japan. And even if they have those clients on their books, they probably already have translators that they trust who they're giving work out. So when it comes to, I can't target everybody with my brand. I'm only a single person. So when I looked at who it would be the most efficient and the most effective for me to translate, rather than an across the board brand name, which could attract everybody, it just made more sense for me to focus my target on the Japan market and make connections with translation agencies in the UK via translators. So that's one of the advantages of being on LinkedIn, is that, you know, I know other translators, and if they do happen to know about work which is Japanese to English, then they'll mention it to me. And if it's good for me, I'll take it. If it's not, I'll recommend somebody else in my circle. So that worked out well for me, I think. I don't know if it works for everybody else.
No, sounds very good to me. So I'm fascinated by your strategy. But I guess it's because you have given a lot of thought to all of this marketing thing and target and audience and all of this, right?
Yeah.
But before we go away, I really cannot help but ask, going back to your first encounter with Japanese, the language itself, because I mean, the culture is, let's not even get into that, because it's insane. It's fascinating. It's beautiful. It's amazing. But I mean, it's a very complex thing, I guess. So what was the first impact? What did you feel when you first thought to yourself, okay, I'm going to learn this language? And you went to that very first class. So what happened? Did you know anything about it? Did you know that the structure was in a certain way? Did you have an idea, or it's something that you never even had thought about before that men came into your life?
Well, when I went to Japan in October 98, and I enrolled in the university in September 99. So I'd been there about a year, and like most early language learners, I thought I had quite a good grasp of the Japanese language when I went to my first class. You know, I knew what I was saying. I knew what everyone else was saying. And then of course I went to my first class and realized I knew absolutely nothing. I mean, I was like really, I of course I'd been there for a year, but I'd just been with my husband who spoke English. And my sister-in-law, my husband's sister, she was a subtitle translator, so she spoke English as well.
Oh, wow.
So very fortunate. Yeah, so I thought I was a Japanese speaker, but I wasn't. But I think, and probably people who are really interested into Japanese might not like this, but I've never been very good at languages. I really struggled to learn German and French at school. I lived in Germany for a short while, but the masculine, feminine nouns, that was beyond me, and the constant changing of the verbs, and perhaps the way it was taught, I don't know. It was very, very difficult for me and I was not good at languages. But for some reason, Japanese just clicked. It was immediately I could understand it. I don't mean I was fluent immediately.
Right, but the philosophy of how things worked.
Yeah, the philosophy. Japanese is incredibly regular. So all the verbs, apart from two, they all change in the same way, whichever tense you're talking in. So all you need to do is remember the root words, and then you can talk. The concept of, I think one of the things that people struggle with most when they're speaking in Japanese is not necessarily the language itself, but the culture. And this culture of being quite kind of avoiding the subject, being a little bit modest, being quite delicate around particular topics, not being very direct. So trying to get your point across by being indirect. I think for somebody growing up in the UK, that's not such an alien concept. I think in the UK, we have that in our culture, right? So that also was quite easy for me to understand. And then it was just a case of memorizing a huge volume of vocabulary, which is much easier in an immersion experience when I'm daily using. I mean,
course.
like I said, back then that was the 90s. So I didn't have like a mobile phone where I could just check things up when I went to the supermarket. I needed to know if I was buying salt or sugar. And you know, and like nobody really speaks English in Japan. It's getting better now, but the level of English is, especially outside of Tokyo, it's pretty non-existent. So if you don't speak Japanese, then you really can't get anything done at that time, right? So it was for me, it was not as difficult a language to learn as other language, which is why I always say to my kids, if you want to learn another language, go and live abroad.
Well,
like, go live
yes,
overseas for a
that
year.
is the best case scenario. Also depending on the
Yeah.
language, because like English is a little bit different from any other language, I suppose, because of the amount of resources that you have everywhere. But is it true that Japanese, it's me and my urban legends, is it true that Japanese basically gets a lot of their vocabulary from other languages, like any other language, obviously, but then it Japanizes it a little bit? Like, I have an example, which might be a lie. But I've heard somewhere that they get the word cheeseburger and they call it something like chizu buguru, something like that. You know, they make it a little bit of a, is this common? Is this a resource that they use a lot?
Yeah, so the Japanese language has 3 different alphabets. They have the kanji, which is the Chinese character alphabet, hiragana, which is a phonetic alphabet, which is in quite like a curvy script. And the hiragana is used for verb endings or to represent a kanji, say for children's books who perhaps haven't learned how to read that Chinese character. And then the third one, katakana, these are quite straight-lined characters. They look very different to hiragana, but they're also a phonetic alphabet. And these words, this alphabet is used to represent imported words and language. So for example, my name is Heidi Carino. Carino is a Japanese surname, so that would be written in Chinese characters, but Heidi is not a Japanese name, so that's written in katakana. And the Japanese language has a consonant vowel. So for example, cheeseburger, when we say cheeseburger, we end in a z sound, but in Japanese there's no consonant ending, so it would have to be a z sound, so sa za ji zu ze zo zu. So then it would be cheeseburger. So it's still the same word, it's still cheeseburger, it's just that to adapt it to the Japanese alphabet, it would have to be adopted. So my name is a great example in that my name is Heidi, and there's no D in the Japanese alphabet. It's been adapted now. You can actually make the D sound, but traditionally there's no D sound in the Japanese alphabet. So a lot of people from the older generation call me Haiji rather than D. And some words which are imported from overseas, the same thing has happened to them. So if they didn't have that sound in their alphabet and there wasn't a way to kind of render that sound, then the sound would change. Or some words are imported from the Spanish, some are imported from Dutch, and some are imported from English. So there is a mix of different words there in the alphabet, in the language, which are imported and changed slightly to adapt them to the Japanese alphabet. Yeah.
Right. Oh, I'd love to know. I mean, wouldn't it be fascinating to learn a language like that? It's just, wow. But going back to the being good at languages, I also, people forgive me, but I also believe that you're not good at languages. I think that you have a certain relationship, and somehow there's something about certain languages that just resonate with you. And then, of course, if you need to learn them for a specific reason, that's a bit different, and you have to try your hardest. But if you do it just out of your intention and emotions, I guess, then it's not necessarily like that. I don't know that people are good at languages, but of course, a person who has learned languages from different families can think of things in a certain way. But I'm a bit with you with the, not because you consider yourself good or bad because you've tried a couple of languages. That doesn't mean that if you're going to expand, because I mean, there's officially about officially as in terms of the number, 7,000 languages or more, then I mean, how do you know if you don't have a relationship to any of them? It doesn't make any sense. So I guess that's how it happens. And because you had a lot of reasons
yeah
that were not linguistic, let's say that, probably that really helped you get into the groove, right, with the Japanese. So Heidi, I've been wanting to talk to you for a long time, as you know. I talked about coming to having you in the podcast many times, and finally it happened. So I'm really happy I did. I am fascinated by how things unfolded in your life, because it all seems very light and very straightforward when you talk about them, because you have that style, right? It's like, wow, very flowy. But I'm sure that there was a lot of, other stories in the mix. And so it's great to just read your posts. I love the way that you write and the way that you talk about things. And it's so real, but at the same time, so subtle. I guess that's why you identify with the Japanese culture so much. But it's been amazing. And I'm really happy that we finally did it. So thank you so much, and I'll see you around. And if you guys are not following Heidi yet, you should, because she has a lot of insights. Oh, no, I cannot leave without talking about something else. Oh my God. She has a podcast. Come on.
Oh, that's true. Yes, I have a bilingual podcast. So this goes back to targeting your audience, but I have a podcast with Yukari Watanabe, who is a friend and colleague of mine, and we wanted to do something to help Japanese translators. And we thought about it a long time, and we just kept thinking about it and planning it and fiddling around. And then in the end, we just thought, oh, let's just do it. Let's just talk in the language that is most comfortable for us. It's not going to be for everybody. But as long as one or two people like it and we're learning something, maybe that's enough, maybe that's enough. So that was our target audience was really, really narrowed down, but it meant that it was something that we can make, which is fun. And I learn something every episode talking to Yukari-san. So if you can speak English and Japanese, or if you're interested in learning Japanese, or you're a Japanese speaker who wants to brush up on your English, then it's a good podcast. And I think it's quite
when you
unique,
say it's
because
bilingual,
I speak in English and then Yukari-san responds in Japanese.
Because you have a dialogue in each. Oh, okay. Because
that's right.
I also do episodes in Portuguese, but it's either all in English or all in Portuguese. But I never thought about this option.
Yeah. So it's you really need to be able to speak both languages to enjoy the podcast. But I think it's at the beginning. You speak 2 languages or possibly more, so you understand. It can be quite difficult to talk to somebody in your native language and then have them talk to you in your second language, and then
I have to try that.
Respond to them in your native language, right? So I have to constantly remind myself to respond to Yukari-san in English, and the same for her as well. But now we've kind of got used to it. It's it's fun.
I understand. I do a lot of those exercises with myself. I code switch a lot to see if I can do it, and go to Spanish, go to Portuguese, come back to English, and all of that, just playing around. But in the podcast, I mean, I can only imagine. So maybe I should give it a shot, right? I'm always open to new ideas. So great. So I need all of your links to actually put then in the presentation, little presentation. So then if you can send them to me, because I'm sure that, people who are involved in this mixture of English and Japanese, I'm sure they will, really enjoy anything that you have to say, because you have, very fresh ideas. I think. So it was really great talking to you. You gave me a lot of food for thought for me too. And it's been amazing. So I'll keep on looking at the stuff that you do, and just I'll give it a shot in the podcast to see if I can at least get an idea of the English part.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's been so much fun. I've wanted to come on the show for a while, so this was really great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, well, let's do it some other time. And until then, I cannot go to your podcast because there's no Japanese here, unfortunately. But okay, I'll see you around. Thank you so much, and
thank you.
Have a great day. Bye.
Yep, you too. Okay, bye-bye.
Oops, still recording.